Out of the night, when the full moon is bright, comes a horseman known as Zorro. This bold renegade carves a Z with his blade, a Z that stands for Zorro. First appearing in the 1919 novel The Curse of Capistrano, Zorro almost immediately became an icon in pop culture. With his flashing rapier, iconic look, and dashing charm, everybody knows who Zorro is. Whether you think of Antonio Banderas, Douglas Fairbanks, Tyrone Power, or Frank Langella, you know who Zorro is and what he's about. What you may not know is that there was a real Zorro named Guillen Lombardo, or William Lamport to his friends. Born in Galway, Ireland in either 1611 or 1615, Lamport was educated by Augustinians and Franciscans in Wexford and by Jesuits in Dublin. He eventually moved to London for his studies, but due to his radical political views for the time, he fled the country, joined up with a gang of pirates, and eventually found himself in St. Patrick's College in La Coruña, Spain. This is where he changed his name to Guillen Lombardo. Almost immediately, he became known for his skills with the sword and his great love of women, making a name for himself as a fighter, fighting at Nordlingen and Fuenterrabía against the Swedish and the French. He was also involved in a conspiracy to send money and troops to Ireland to help fight against English rule, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of information about this, in English at least. While in Spain, he met one Ana de Cano y Livia, and the union was very quickly blessed with a daughter, Teresa. Unfortunately, the relationship didn't last, and in 1640, the Duke of Alvarez, chief minister of King Philip IV, sent Lamport to Mexico as a spy. The viceroy of the time, the Marquis of Villena, was related to the new Portuguese king who had been placed on the throne following a revolution against Spanish rule. The Spanish ruling class were concerned as to Villena's sympathies, and Lombard seemed the perfect man to keep an eye on him. In Mexico, Lamport moved amongst the highest classes, even getting engaged to Antonia Tercios, a wealthy heiress. He monitored Creole discontent, kept an eye on Villena, and reported it all back to his superiors. At some point in 1641, Lamport made the decision to overthrow Villena, uniting with black, Creole, and native people to pull off this daring plan. It was here that he made a fatal mistake. He shared his plan with Captain Mendez, who immediately reported it to the Audiencia, or civil courts, and to the Inquisition. His alleged consorting with witch doctors and alleged use of peyote moved it from treason, which is a civil law matter, to heresy, which is under the Inquisition. Amongst his crimes was the wild idea that slavery was bad. Why do you buy and sell men as if they are beasts? They are unjustly sold to you, and unjustly you buy them. You commit a savage and cruel crime before God. Let's look at his backstory. He came from a Catholic family in Ireland and experienced some manner of discrimination in London before going to Spain. And now here he is in an entirely new country, a new world. And here's a European monarch claiming, mine. For an educated Irishman with the slightest shred of awareness, the parallels with English actions in Ireland are pretty obvious. It's not a perfect match, but there are parallels. He declared that only the people living in Mexico had a right to Mexico, and that it belonged to the indigenous peoples with the blunt, the kingdom is theirs. He drew up plans for a limited monarchy where Indians and freemen are to have the same voice and vote as the Spaniards, which would end the colonial caste system. Freedom would be granted to all the slaves who cooperated with the rebellion. Cooperative indigenous towns would be relieved of repartimientos, or forced labor drafts, and free trade would be established with Europe and China, with Mexican silver remaining in Mexico instead of being sent to Spain. William believed this new world power would rise to prominence among the nations of the world. Finally, his regime would not be an absolute monarchy. He proposed a limited monarchy with either himself or whoever the people choose as a king who would rule in consultation with an active parliament. He was a very firm believer that the people retained the right of rebellion if the monarch became a tyrant. He did indulge in little imaginings of his victory, imagining people in the streets yelling, "Long live Don Julian, our emperor, our king, and our liberator! Viva!" These plans didn't sit well with the Mexican Inquisition, and he was summarily convicted and imprisoned. He was protected to an extent by friends in the Spanish court, but still spent 7 years in prison where he apparently had a great time. He wrote extensively, made many friends with many different people, and eventually became the leader of the prisoners. Then on December 26th, 1650, he escaped. He could have fled the country, could have escaped to almost anywhere. Instead, he chose to stay in Mexico City, openly defying the Inquisition and posting posters everywhere listing the crimes of both the Inquisition and the ruling class. It seems likely that this was a trap. His guards were absent the night of his escape, and about 200 pamphlets were printed and distributed almost immediately after he put up his posters. It seems like they knew that he was going to do this, and they set him up to charge him with far more serious charges of escaping prison, distributing dangerous materials, who knows what else. He was captured again fairly quickly and spent another 9 years in prison, where he again continued to write extensive treatises condemning the Inquisition and approximately 1,000 psalms in Latin, which are available. I can't read them. Latin is not my thing at all, but they are available online apparently. With his allies dead or dying, he was finally sentenced to death in 1659. And on November 19th, he was taken to be burned at the stake as a heretic. He was tied to the stake, but somehow managed to strangle himself with his iron collar before the fire started. His last will and testament proclaimed his hope that the time of God's judgment would soon come, and his certainty that the Archbishop of Mexico City would be engulfed into the fires of hell. After his death, he became a martyr to both the poor and the Franciscan order of monks, with people openly yelling his name in a failed revolution in 1666. A Franciscan monk, Fray Diego de la Cruz, was publicly punished for praising him. On the 19th of December, 1760, Antonio Perez, a native who had been educated by a Franciscan friar near Puebla, founded a movement of saintly believers, a syncretic mix of Christian ideas and native traditions. He was very heavily inspired by Lamport, writing manifestos to the authorities proclaiming the Archbishop of Mexico was already prey to the devil, and that Perez's right-hand man, a man named Pascal, would receive from heaven the crown of King of Mexico. In 1796, yet another poster was stuck to the gate of the Cathedral in Mexico City. This poster was blatantly inciting Mexicans to free themselves from monarchy and religion after the example of the French Revolution. In 1810, Father Miguel Hidalgo led a rebellion with the cry of "Long live Our Lady of Guadalupe, death to bad government and the Spaniards." He was captured and executed within a year. 4 years after that, on Palm Sunday, 1815, Inquisitor Jose Mariano Beristain was in the middle of a violent sermon denouncing Hidalgo and his followers when he dropped dead of a stroke. Immediately, yet another poster appeared, claiming, just like Lamport's, that this was a just judgment from God. 5 years after that, the Mexican Inquisition was finally abolished. To those who knew their history, they believed that Don Lombardo had finally won. So, we have a sword-wielding aristocrat who also fought for the poor and underprivileged and left messages taunting the ruling class. We have a lot of the pieces of Zorro, but we're missing some final few pieces, a little touch of the mythic and the supernatural. That will come later. In 1872, a retired Mexican general named Vicente Riva Palacio wrote Memorias de un Impostor, a historical romance inspired by Dumas's Three Musketeers and Guillen Lombardo. It seems to have been fairly faithful to Lamport's actual life, even including quotes from his trial, but it was exaggerated in service of the story. And as he was a Freemason, Palacio included a new kind of mysticism. Lombardo saves himself from damnation by discovering his own Ziza, or the divine spark that lives within us all. Ziza is a Semitic word that means shining, and in Freemasonic thought, it is represented by the letter Z. The Z, in Freemasonry, means triumph over adversity, of victory over tyranny. It means freedom. And now we have all the pieces. We have a hero. We have a symbol. We've got a struggle. All we need now is someone to take this mix of historical fact, Freemasonic thought, mythology, and add that little final creative spark, that little thing that starts the fire. Enter Johnson Macaulay, who was also a Freemason. He took the name Zorro the Fox from another Palacio story, changed the name to Don Diego de la Vega, and simplified the plot down to a straightforward action story to give us the Curse of Capistrano. Zorro took to the stage fully formed, a fusion of Irish and Mexican history, Freemasonic symbolism, and non-stop action. Swashes were buckled, women swooned, sword clanged, and pop culture was never the same. After this came The Mark of Zorro in 1920, written by and starring another Freemason, Douglas Fairbanks. I have reached out to the Freemasons for commenting on this, but they have not replied. I'm not sure if they're ever going to. It's pretty weird to live. We live in a world where we can just email secret societies, but here we are. After this came The Son of Zorro in 1925, Zorro Rides Again in 1937, multiple film serials in the 40s, several TV series, multiple animated series, 65 stage shows, and it's still going even today. They're actually working on a new reboot with Robert Rodriguez and Sofia Vergara producing. And that's just Zorro. We're not even talking about his massive influence on characters like Superman or Batman. I mean, the Batman parallels are very, very obvious. I mean, they even include the original 1920s movie in his origin story. And all of this was because of one runaway from Galway. One guy who said, nah, this is wrong. That what you were doing to these people is wrong. Why do you buy and sell men as if they are beasts? They are unjustly sold to you, and unjustly you buy them. You commit a savage and cruel crime before God. The story of Zorro and Guillen, or William, is a story about fighting back. It is a story of drawing a line in the sand and saying, no. The story of Zorro, the story of Guillen, is a story that you can make a difference. Everyone can, if you're brave, if you truly believe in what you're doing. In the world we live in right now, it's a scary time. Just remember that you can indeed help and you can make a difference.